Okay, I think this is titled Shop Talk, so we've got to talk about a shop. Have you visited any shops here in Rotterdam? No, I have not had time. No. Anybody in the audience? Okay. Any questions? That's what we usually use this for. Questions from the audience. We don't have any on the Post-its, I don't believe. So I expect that you've all saved them up. Before we get, Tim's ready. Yes.
I haven't been following the recent developments in the DITA-OT. So my question is that my understanding is that the 2.0 DITA standard is going to sorry, I'm tired. Remove support for the use of the TRF and XTRC attributes. Is this happening in the toolkit?
Okay, so I can I can repeat that question. Asking DITA 2.0 is getting rid of a couple of attributes called XTRC, XTRF. Those are used for debugging in the toolkit under the covers. And the question is, are we also getting rid of them? And the answer is no. They are being removed from source files, and they're not supposed to be there in source files, really. The only reason they were there in the first place is because some early tools that worked with DITA in the DITA 1.0 timeframe needed a way to store that sort of information, but they also validated at every step of the process, which the toolkit doesn't do, and I think no current processor does. The way that the processing works in the toolkit is we validate, like when we're first reading the files, against a DTD file, XSD, RNG, whatever, and then we write out an XML file and we just kind of assume it's valid from there on. We're not checking the DITA rules at every stage every time we read it. So we can write those attributes out and it's fine. You will no longer be able to set those in the source files. So if you were hacking processing somehow to basically use those attributes because they were globally available, I think it's possible that someone was just seeing that those attributes were there everywhere, putting them in, and then trying to pick them up later in processing. If you were doing that, you'll have to find another way to hack it, or create a specialized DITA domain that just adds the attributes back, in which case they'll be there and you use them exactly as you are now.
I use them all the time.
Okay. Young uses them all the time. Okay.
But you do not use the
Yeah. All right. Yes, Alan.
Okay, here's one. I use the normalized DITA plugin all the time as a base. So I use the normalized DITA plugin all the time as a base for other processing. But the output of the normalized DITA plugin is not valid DITA. Can you explain?
Can you explain why it needs to be?
Well, because I'm often, sometimes I'm feeding it into the next step of the chain that expects valid data. Now, it's not off by much. I think it's 2 attributes that I can remove within XSLT, but I was just wondering if there was a design decision.
Oh, it's a bug.
Really?
It should produce valid data.
Okay.
If it doesn't, it's a bug. Please file an issue in our GitHub repo.
Okay. And then topic meta char of submaps getting thrown away is similar, maybe a bug? Okay.
Don't know.
I'll follow some bugs.
I'm not sure I followed exactly what you were asking there. Topic meta elements in a submap getting thrown out?
So if you have a DITA map with, I'll call them the submaps, colloquial term, and the submaps have, I believe topic meta is legal as a child of a map.
Yeah.
If a submap has topic meta with data elements as children, that topic meta is discarded on the aggregation of the maps.
Yes and no. It is kept in the processing in a specialized processing only map element because it's it's not really clear where it fits when you assemble the thing and turn it into like a valid map. You don't have a construct anymore that says, I am the border of the submap. Now, we have that in pre-processing. We have that element there, and it's basically a submap element. So we condense everything into one file, and then you have a marker that says, here's where the submap was, and then you have a namespace element in there that says, here's all that topic meta, so I can grab it and do what I need.
Okay.
But because the output of normalized DITA becomes valid DITA again, and that normalized DITA does not have a grouping element that says I am a map, that grouping element is thrown away. Like it's cleaned out of the normalized DITA along with that topic meta. So
Okay, so I'm not missing a place to look in the output.
No, if
to the
you-
file system or the
if you
source.
saved your temp file, which all of us do, I assume, at some point, if you saved your temp directory and you dig in there and basically stop the processing right before the final step that cleans it up and makes it valid DITA again, it's there right up until that point, but then there's not a clear spot to hold that in valid DITA, which is why it doesn't appear anymore. And in theory, that like the metadata that would cascade should still be there because it cascaded, but your data elements would not be because there's no clear place to put them.
Okay, makes some sense. Thank
Would it
you.
make sense to turn them into processing instructions? Maybe?
Would it make sense to turn them into processing instructions is George's question.
Yeah, I mean, if you want that information to be there, but to be still valid,
It could be.
one option would be to create some processing instructions instead.
What we could do is split the merged map again into
Back into
multiple
submaps.
maps
Yep.
and submaps. We currently don't do that. There has been no need to do that.
It might be that the people using it would not, like that would be a regression for them. They may need the single map.
Yeah.
That's one
Because
reason to run the
basically
normalize.
It normalizes everything. It normalizes keys away, chunking. It removes all the processing. So then the question is, why would you want to re-establish the nested maps? I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
some people do. So it could be added as an option for the normalization plugin that blow up or explode the merged map again into multiple submaps.
This makes me realize that we didn't clarify what the normalized DITA plugin is, and there are likely people in the audience who don't know what it is because not many people have a need for it, I think. But yeah, it's basically a plugin that runs the pre-process where we resolve keys, resolve conref, pull all the maps from many submaps into one file. And the normalized DITA plugin at the end just gives you that resulting DITA. It's basically fully evaluated but turned back into DITA without a lot of the processing garbage in it.
It actually applies filtering as well.
Yeah. And so it's basically ready to format DITA. It's got all of that early stuff out of the way.
I like to think of that as normalized DITA as dumber DITA for tools that don't support like recent constructs and only understand old things. So like if you don't understand keys, use this instead. I don't know if that's the right way to think of it, but that's always been my mental model. And just before I hand the mic over to Jarno, I would like to think for a moment out loud about what would that exploded version with the submaps put in again be? What would that be called if normalized DITA doesn't have it? Is this unnormalized DITA?
It's clearly abnormal.
Abnormal DITA.
Abnormalized.
I've always thought of it as convert DITA 2.0 into something that looks like DITA 1.0.
Yeah.
Because it didn't have all those processing thingamajiggies.
Yeah.
That's a technical term. So we're removing all of those and pretend you're consuming DITA 1.0 or something that it looks like a lightweight version of DITA.
It removes the features but not the elements, basically.
It's similar to the newer version of JavaScript that
Yeah.
kind of get down.
All right.
to-
We started off with the highly technical questions. Should we keep going in that vein? People have them? Or
Sure.
yes, Tim, another one.
A client of mine has been causing, a client of mine has been going through some irksome issues with the use of URIs in things like topic ref elements and so on. And the DITA standard requires that URI references follow the RFC 3986 standard, which says that there are certain reserved characters, like spaces, periods, and question mark, and so on, that if they are going to be used in the URI, they have to be escaped. But what I've learned is that the DITA Open Toolkit, at least up to 3.7, is inconsistent about this. Sometimes it'll issue a warning, but handle it. Other times it issues the warning, but doesn't handle it. And my instinctively autocratic response is to say to customers, well, form your URIs correctly, people. But really, I'm thinking that the toolkit should really enforce the standard and be strict about it. But I just want to know which way is it going to go.
So OT has this thing called processing mode that takes 3 different values, strict, lax, and skip, or none, something like that. So if you set that to strict, whenever it finds a URI that is not correct, it will halt. It's a fatal error, or just an error. The default is lax, where it tries to fix everything it finds that's incorrect. Like if it finds a space, it replaces with %20. So it tries to fix it. And then skip is, it just skips the thing, probably reports it, and then continues, and then allows anything downstream in the processing to fail, because you said skip, don't care. We have processing for the lax mode, mainly in the beginning of pre-process. So we try to fix everything that we find that's incorrect in the beginning. There may be bugs when we introduce new things that don't work, and the lax processing is only implemented in the beginning, so we don't fix it again. So it might be a bug. If you're running it in lax mode, those should always work, but you should get a warning or an error message. The lax mode is something I think most people want, even though DITA, the specification might be more strict, because spaces in URIs, but browsers support those. You can just type something in the browser navigation bar and it works, because like draconian error handling there is not user friendly.
Yeah, like Firefox knows if you put a space in there and Firefox says, I'm sorry, you need to go up to your URL and type in %20 and then I'll work, nobody's going to like that. That's not going to go over well. Similar here, if there's a space we know that is supposed to be a %20, it's just something that wasn't escaped. So we warn about it, because some tools will fail with that, and it's possible that processing will fail later. So we warn about it, but the default is to continue. And for a long time, the toolkit just accepted those quietly. And so this is also kind of a backwards compatibility thing, that if we suddenly stopped supporting that and said, we're sorry, from now on, you have to follow the rules, even on stuff where we know what you mean, a lot of old content would simply stop publishing, and nobody would like that either.
Is this mode parameter, is it property passed in to ant, or
Yep.
is it set?
Yeah, the DITA command line or an ant if you're calling from ant. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I know there have been bugs over time where URIs are not evaluated properly, and like they'll work and it says it changes, but maybe a URI is reevaluated later or somehow touched later, and you get malformed URI exception. I've seen those over time, and that's a bug that should be fixed. It means it wasn't handled properly somewhere.
Should we go
Check
through
our
the
list.
list?
Yep. Okay. Question from the audience. How do I do this? There we go. Yeah, question from the audience. What's coming next? I don't know. Let's wait until we get home and find out. What do you want to work on, Jarno? Anything?
I just posted to my my company Slack, which is sort of full of people who are better coders than I am, asking them which data structure would really work well with cache invalidation in a graph. So some of you probably understood what that means. So I'm kind of interested in finally tackling the idea of incremental publishing by adding a cache invalidation there. I don't know how long it will take, probably a year or two. Depends on how much time I have to work on this stuff. And I don't know, in the end, I implement cache invalidation and no one cares. That might also be a thing. Because then you go, do I actually have to store those cache files myself? Can't you do it for me? And I go, no, you have to store them between publishing runs. But cache invalidation would be really cool to have. Some people have actually requested it over years, so it would be something that our absent product owner might want to have us work on.
It's also something that those of you who happen to have developers with time on their hands, they could contribute ideas or contribute code even, help out. Probably won't spend too long asking for that because we've asked for that lots of times. Yeah. Yes?
I have a question on multi-language support for HTML5. So let's say I have a data map, I have 300 images, I have to publish to 20 languages. When I just publish, I have 20 times 300 languages, 20 times 300 images in my output. So is there, you can, with the rewrite XSL parameter, you can deduplicate that again to once, but is there also something that we can do like for like all the CSS file, all the JavaScript files, to all bundle them, and that I just have once all the CSS, all the JavaScript, and then once have all the images, and then I have my topics per language, let's say. Is it something that you are thinking about? Or because now I have 20 times JavaScript, I have 20 times CSS, I have 20 times images by default, and I want to reuse that stuff. I just want to have my images once or my CSS once.
So for my part, we handle that on the server deploy side, not in the toolkit side. Basically by deploying the CSS and JavaScript once in the English directory, and we have redirects on the server. So if you're looking at French, it looks in the French directory for CSS, it doesn't find it, it falls back to English. And that's how we get the deduplication, but we don't have to worry about it on the toolkit side.
My go-to solution has usually been have Open Toolkit generate links to JavaScript and CSS that you don't control in the Open Toolkit system. Mm-hmm. Like have the web developers just give you a URL somewhere on the root of your domain, for example, and don't try and retain those or keep those CSS and JavaScript files there. But if you're doing like static offline generation, then you sort of have to. I would probably solve this problem with post-processing, something that copies those CSS files and JavaScript files into the output directories after Open Toolkit has done its thing. And like you said, the rewrite XSL or Java extension points allow you to rewrite image references, so all of those point to a shared directory. It can be solved inside Open Toolkit, But in most
Not
cases, I would
completely.
probably try to solve it partially outside Open Toolkit
Yeah.
processing.
Do you have any thoughts on this one, Roger?
Nope.
Okay.
That's yours.
There's a question there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so Slack, Roger, remember I asked you about wrapping and code blocks? And you said that it's not a output class like you can, there's two output classes that are supported, line numbers and to show
White spaces. Yep.
What does that you said it's in a variable somewhere hidden, but how does it actually behave?
So the man next to me told me all I know about this. I'll answer your question as well as I can, but I'm going to have to hand the mic back over again. But John asked a question a while back in Slack about he had read somewhere that there's a variable about that governs line wrapping in code blocks when you have samples of code that are longer than the code block can display comfortably in the width. There's some magic way of wrapping that automatically. And I learned from Jarno that there is indeed an XSLT parameter that can be set to do that, but you would have to basically create a custom plugin that does nothing other than set that parameter, and then you could investigate how it works. I didn't have time for that exercise before we came here today, so I don't really know. So one way to do it would be to just try and see what happens. And then the other thing would be to ask the guy next to me, maybe he knows without trying.
Okay, I tried to investigate that because I wanted to add that support to the theme plugin. I didn't find an answer. That's code I wrote eons ago, and I think it should work. I will have to get back to you. There are also similar variables there in the XSLTs hidden there that allow you to, for example, take tab characters, which can be 2 or 4 characters wide, depending on your editor, and sort of replace those with spaces. So how many spaces is a tab? There are things like that, and they were added at some point, and it might be that they don't work the same way in HTML and PDF, but it's code that probably hasn't been used that much due to it being kind of hidden and not documented. So it's possible that there are bugs there, but I'm thinking of adding support for that in the theme plugin, at least for PDF.
Thank you. Yeah, we implemented something ourselves because we didn't see it in the documentation, but we created some output classes, one that says wrap on punctuation, wrap or special characters, wrap on camel case changes, or wrap on anything, basically any character, and it injects 0 with spaces. So we had to do something pre-FO to allow us to inject something in there and then post-FO, but before FOC to catch it and call the function that injects all this stuff in. And if there was like I said earlier, if there's something that does it already, I would love to rip that stuff out. So that's all that was about.
Keep an eye on the questions.
And I think that's it. I had another one, but it's gone.
Because a couple of them are important to us.
Okay, question from the audience for the two of you. What's happening with our DITA-OT Slack space?
So we've been using Slack for many years now, just to communicate sort of amongst ourselves and to communicate some of the notifications that come in through GitHub. We started doing that at a time when GitHub didn't produce notifications itself so reliably, and so Slack was kind of like a notifications channel for us for a while there. GitHub has gotten better at notifications now. They have a dedicated panel where you can mark things as read and save them and decide what you want to get notifications for and not. So it's becoming a little less useful for us as a notifications hub, I would say. And the other thing is that Slack made a grave change over the years their business model, whereby they used to preserve history forever, and they now preserve history for 90 days unless you are a paid customer. Slack's business model has a price per user, so to use Slack for our team, not knowing how many people there are with free signups, if any one of us put our credit card to that, you would all basically be able to execute a denial of service attack on us by signing up for Slack and charging our credit cards. So we're realizing that that's not working, and Slack as a place where discussions in the community happen is also not quite what it was initially. So we're looking for alternatives to that, and there are a gazillion different chat apps out there, and some of them are very welcome and friendly to open source projects. But I don't know if we want to move from Slack to Zulip and Discord and all of those other things. But GitHub has recently expanded its support for open source projects with their discussions product. I don't know if it's the right thing, but feature, let's say, which under the hood are basically issues that aren't necessarily bugs or features, but it's a place where discussions can happen. And they realize that what they've been doing to enable conversations on issues could actually be used to enable persistent conversations like in forums. So there you can basically, as a user, ask a question. Other members of the community can respond to that, upvote it if they find it to be helpful, mark a question as answered, those sorts of features that you have from other discussion forum software. So one idea that we have would be to use that because it is a persistent place where discussions are recorded and actually would remain. So if someone asked a question 3 years ago about that line wrapping XSLT parameter that he heard about, but doesn't quite know how it works, and someone answered that question, then that answer would be preserved for posterity for a while, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're thinking about, that might be suitable. And the good thing about it is it gives each of these discussions a URL. So, if someone asked that question and someone answered it, and then someone asks it again later on somewhere else, even on DITA users or something, someone could respond to that with a link to that thread. And, there are a number of people in the room who certainly are, grew up in these things using DITA users and these email lists, but a lot of us are tired of email in some ways, and not everyone has time to read all the email lists and that kind of stuff. So we're thinking of these GitHub discussions as a potential alternative to Slack. And we just wanted to kind of read the room a little bit to see how people feel about that. At the moment, we see two aspects of that could be an issue. We like the fact that they're preserved for posterity and don't expire.
And searchable.
They're searchable, they're votable. Community people can say, yes, this was super helpful, so percolate it to the top. One disadvantage is that although these discussions are visible and public to the world, for reading purposes, in order to write to these discussions, in order to post a question or post an answer, you must have a GitHub account. A GitHub account is not harder to receive than a Slack sign up. So we don't think that's a big degradation, but just wanted to check what all of you think.
So from my perspective, those GitHub discussions, like you said, they're searchable, but that means, for example, Google or DuckDuckGo can index them. Whereas with Slack, it's in the search index of Slack, that single company. So we are in a way making information more public. And one thing, if you think about which chat client should we choose, it's not really a chat if I respond 2 days later because of time zone differences, because I don't do this for as a day job. So the async nature of discussion forums, I think, works better than trying to pretend that we can chat about this and get the answer in 30 seconds. Slack works really nicely in, for example, at my day job, but that's a really different environment. And GitHub discussions with the ability to mark something as answered is brilliant. You can probably get your name on the cover page if you answer really a lot of questions there, and those are marked as the answer. So, well, it probably will be Radu, but if you want to compete with Radu for that place,
Yeah.
we were talking
Gamification.
gamification of answering questions.
Yeah, and we've talked in the past about Slack not being ideal because things are hidden there, because it's not as findable. But their policy, like, it used to store all the history, and then for a long time it was, we'll store the most recent 10,000 messages for free. And that was generally okay for us, because that still let us go back 6 months or a year, and like, we don't, it's not a really active Slack space. But then they said, regardless of the number of messages, we're cutting everything off at 3 months, and at that point we're losing history that was still sometimes being accessed.
And I think Jarno raised another important point there that plays into it, for me at least, and that is that with Slack, because some people use it within their company, those little green dots create an expectation of immediate response.
Yep.
Amongst our colleagues in the company, we perhaps expect that when we see that green dot, if we write to them, they will respond instantly, right? I can just say I work as a consultant for multiple companies. At the same time, I currently have 20 different Slack workspaces in my desktop client. I'm active in many of them. That little green dot means my computer is on. I'm working on something, but I may not be sitting there waiting for a member of the DITA-OT community to ask me how to do something in DITA-OT. And so I think that, I don't want to set my status to offline and pretend I'm not around for the community. But the fact that I am at my computer typing keys doesn't mean I have time to do this right now. And I think that's, that Jarno's really right about the fact that a chat client creates a perception of availability. And I think these are discussions that are better suited to asynchronous stuff.
So Roger, you asked earlier if anybody had problems with this. I feel like we've spent a long time trying to convince everybody this is a good idea without, I suspect there's not going to be much pushback on it. So we can probably stop the convincing. But yeah, does anybody think that this is oh, I see a thumbs up. We're good. 2 thumbs up, that wins.
What's next?
What's next? Do you want to talk about the sponsorship stuff? Not quite sure how to talk about that.
I can talk. Over the years, there have been questions how to support the project with money, and our persistent answer has been, well, I don't know what we could do with money. Like, we could just use it for coffee, or I don't know, Netflix account for the 3 of us. But what if there's someone who's
Shared logins don't work anymore.
Yes, exactly. So, but then Radu's there, but he's kind of working. So, should we also include him in sharing the funds, like the €3 that we would get? So, was it yesterday that I arrived to Amsterdam? Was it Amsterdam? I'm really tired, sorry. And we sort of were working around the same table, finalizing the release. And that's something I would like to use money for, to be able to, I don't know, once a year, like during OT day, to come one day early, to have a full day of working together and doing stuff instead of Netflix account. And that would sort of be fair, or more fair maybe, if we could bring the people who are most active to be in the same space, like once a year maybe. We would probably need to finance most of it from our own pocket, but the money that could come in from outside sources could be used for that. And I think it's a challenge for every open source project. How do you use the money that you might get? Do you pay for one person to work on it, instead of them doing their day job? How long will you be able to work with that? Because
And how much do you pay them for the time they put in?
exactly. So if you pay like €2 per hour, that doesn't really cover your costs. And we are really small project, so we can't get hundreds of euros to be spent on one person working one day. So that was the discussion we had about sponsorship, that if we were ever to like be sort of sponsored, we would probably try and use it for working together.
Like a DITA-OT camp.
Yeah, I mean, we've done things like this privately on our own money over the years. I have been going to Finland every year in January, personally, just on my own money to see friends. And since I know this Finnish guy in Helsinki, we have always then reserved a day to work together on toolkit stuff. And a lot of the things that we've shipped over the years have come out of some of those collaborations. So we found it really valuable to actually sit down in the same room for a couple of hours and work on stuff that we weren't getting done asynchronously from afar. And sometimes it's just the brainstorming aspect. It's a little trickier to get Robert at that table.
I was going to say a couple of things. First off, I haven't joined in on those because Roger's friends find it really weird when I come stay with them. The other thing is, I should also clarify, I'm the one here with a corporate job that will not let me take this sort of sponsorship money. Since this is being recorded, I want to make that clear. If the project were sponsored, it would certainly help pay for your travel. I would probably still be coming on my own, which is the sad part of having a nice corporate job.
Yeah, so that's the hard thing about it. I mean, people have asked us over the years, can we help? And we said, yeah, but we're not sure how to do it right.
Yeah.
So
some of those opportunities may be opening up, I think, was the idea of like on GitHub. Is it through GitHub? Sponsorship.
one idea, GitHub has sort of put together a sponsorship service where anyone that uses anything that happens on GitHub can click a little sponsor button if the person wants to be sponsored. That's voluntary. And because GitHub is a company that's run by this little outfit called Microsoft, they have a rather sophisticated billing outfit behind it. So companies who want to donate and sponsor someone through GitHub can actually receive a proper invoice for their corporate billing policies. And so that makes it a little bit easier. It wasn't like that 2 or 3 years ago.
So we've talked about this sort of thing and always kind of pushed it off. And I think the reason it's coming up now is, first off, GitHub has that, so it's actually plausible now where it wasn't before. And also we've gotten some questions sometimes from people in this very room much more recently about how to do this.
So GitHub uses Stripe as the payment processor, and Stripe is, I think, fairly big player in that area.
So we've had a couple of hands up in the back. How about Stefan, since you're closer? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. We are using another open source software, and this is maintained by a company. So the software itself is open source, and you can buy a subscription per year, and then you get some commercial support. So this is something which is might be interesting for the toolkit. I understand the contract issues you might have, so you don't have the capacities to offer 24 hours support, something like this. For us, it's a little bit tricky because when I have a problem, I can raise an issue, and it might be resolved. But if the issue is really critical for us, then I have to keep my fingers crossed and write emails containing the word "please" and as soon as possible, and so forth.
You don't have a way to escalate that with money.
Yeah. So it would be interesting to have some similar setup there with a subscription model. And I also understand that Microsoft is supporting this in some way with the Oxygen publishing engine, so which is the toolkit bundled with plugins. But also here, it's, at least for me as a customer and as a user, it's not clear where the responsibility starts. So what is the publishing engine and what can I expect as a customer of the publishing engine and when it is the Open Toolkit. So where is this border? So I cannot expect Synchrosoft to fix an Open Toolkit issue in 24 hours. I mean, it's obvious Synchrosoft is doing an awesome support and they drive the community, and without Synchrosoft, the DITA Open Toolkit would not have any commercial backbone. So it's good, but still as a customer, I have to ask, and this is difficult for me and makes me feel bad because I put a lot of dependency on this toolkit. And what also could be very interesting when opening up a commercial channel for the toolkit would be to invest this money into PR. So I could also think of going to a fair and talk about the DITA Open Toolkits and DITA in general and do some marketing, but I'm not willing to pay flights and hotels and fees from my private money. I would get problems at home. This is not possible. So it would be good if you open a commercial channel in some way.
Yeah, so I don't have an answer for you. I can tell you a few things. One, we have DITA-OT.com domain registered, and that's about it. So we have the domain for our
Commercial venture.
Commercial venture. We have the domain, or rather, someone has it. Then about support contracts and such, you need a company to do that. You need people working on it. So we can't do it with this setup. I can always stop working for Wunderdog and become a consultant, but then I would need to stop after 2 days because I ran out of seed money or seed funding.
Yep.
And sort of going back to the sponsorship bit, if someone were to sponsor us, are they sponsoring us for the work we have done, or are they sponsoring us for the work that they expect to be done? And that sort of, if you expect to sponsor us for the work that we will do for you because you requested it, then it sort of sounds like a commercial company. Whereas if you sort of sponsor us to do our thing and sort of also appreciate the work that we have done and you want us to continue, then that's sort of more close to the open source project type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And right now we are in no place to start commercial support, especially since everyone knows that DITA is the obsolete technology and everyone's using Markdown, even though they could be using ASCII-Doc, which is superior to Markdown.
Speaking of Markdown, we only have a few minutes left, so we wanted to lead into one other topic.
You keep this.
Jarno, you were supposed to have a rant about Markdown. It was on the agenda, and everybody's upset we didn't get it.
Okay, so there's this thing I did that some people might find not a good idea. So remember that, like,
Wait, that thing he did that some people might think is not a good idea? He conformed to the spec.
yeah. So there's this lightweight DITA plugin that implements lightweight DITA, and if you use in your documents mdita, it will process that Markdown file for you. A while back, I actually started to read the spec, and I noticed, it doesn't talk about code spans anywhere. You know, the backticks that you use for monotype font that you use to mark up, for example, variables and all sorts of coding things. Lightweight DITA doesn't have that, so I thought, okay, I'll remove it. So in the current version of Open Toolkit, the markdown processing, if you use backticks, you get a PH element in XML that's in the temporary directory, so you won't get the code span and the teletype font, you'll just get normal text. So I sort of broke all your lightweight DITA documents that use backticks. Sorry.
So those of you who are on the Lightweight DITA committee, or at least on the email list, if you have been following your email over the weekend, which I expect most of you have done, you will see that I wrote to the list yesterday asking, was this intentional that there's no code phrase or absent code phrase to keep it small? Maybe the monospaced element from the highlight domain, which looks like it was intentionally left out. Maybe that should be restored, because that would be a way to follow the spec and not ignore all of these backticks that people use in all their markdown. But if anybody's responded to that yet, I haven't seen it because I haven't been following my email since I sent it.
Well, I can
Oh,
tell
Frank.
that Mark has responded to that because he got the history that I don't have, and I seconded that and kind of put it on the agenda.
All right.
So we
Okay,
created
so
an
that
incentive for the spec update.
If the spec changes, or if the spec draft changes, then the implementation will change. This isn't trolling. I didn't remove it just because I thought, ha ha ha, I'll break everyone's code. But it's just that I naturally assume that because when I write Markdown at my work, I use backticks all the time for all sorts of inline code phrases or words. And that's something that I do all the time. And when I noticed that it's not in the spec, I thought I'll be compliant. I'll follow the spec. So if the lightweight DITA folks add that sort of element back there, or add that, then you'll get it back. But right now, you sort of can't use it anymore.
In
And
MDT.
that's,
In MDTA.
yeah, that's if you are embedding Markdown in your maps using format equals mdita, which explicitly says, I'm following the rules of lightweight Markdown DITA. If you import it as plain old Markdown, it still works.
So this information was supposed to be in multiple places in the release notes, in my presentation, and then I and slash
It's in the release notes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hidden there.
It's hidden in plain sight.
It's hidden in plain sight among the prominent new features, yes. It's not exactly a new feature, but it's a new change under the lightweight DITA changes.
Maybe one remark, because that is an attitude I completely agree with, because it also then works the other way around. So, yeah, thanks. So if there is something that is coming up in the spec, we can more or less rely on that at some point to pick it up and implement it. So, and if you're telling us that something is missing that you obviously expected, then that's well worth asking for it.
Mm.
So if there is something done in the field, then this is something that we should consider and come to grips about it.
So if you add it to the spec draft next week, I can add it to the implementation next week. But we won't be releasing new Open Toolkit version for this one thing. So we'll release just the plugin, stick it into plugin registry, and you need to sort of install it yourself if you're already using 4.0.
Yeah. But the next meeting would have taken place tomorrow, and I canceled it because of this conference.
Sorry.
So it's Dawn's fault, is what you're saying. Yeah. For scheduling the conference. Yes.
Maybe a rat hole about that, but
Uh-oh.
so one place Yardo and I disagree. Oh, what was the word you used? Lightweight DITA is retrofitting Markdown to DITA, but it's really an expression of DITA in different vocabularies. So we have a different, now, and just looking at the issue of, oh, this very common thing in Markdown is missing in lightweight DITA. It was explicit, I'm walking a plank here, but from my reading, my quick reading of the committee note, inline code was not included in XDITA or HDITA, so it should not be included in MDITA either.
Right.
Now code blocks are included in all three, so that was a choice. It was a choice made.
Yeah, and when I questioned it about MDITA, and we're talking about MDITA here, that yes, it's missing from all of them, all expressions of lightweight DITA. It's just, as Jarno said earlier, there's not much use of HDITA or XDITA, and what we're focusing on with implementation is MDITA, so that's where we came at it from.
Yeah.
But also, I think certainly from for me, I when writing in Markdown, whether that's a Markdown file or typing in Slack or typing in whatever social media tool we're using, the backtick thing is just so common to me that it's second nature. I just type it in to get the monospace, and so that's why we focused on that, because it is so common in Markdown.
Yeah. I'm not objecting to its inclusion. You know, in specs, the
Right.
boundaries are always fine.
Yep.
You know, what do you support? What don't
Yeah.
you support? So, anyway, but I don't think it was an unintentional omission.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I sent the email asking, was this intentional? I didn't know. I wasn't there for the discussions. I did not know the history. And I wasn't sure if the answer would be, you heretic, you should never ask for this element, or oops, or hey, yeah, maybe we should rethink. You know, any of those were valid responses.
And then you can think of, okay, that might have been a good reason 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So when lightweight DITA came up, that was, I think, 2014, 13 or so, Mark Priestley came up with that idea. And so he set up something, so 2014, so 2015, kind of spread the word, and things have changed, and the use has changed in between. So because it's still not out there, it makes sense to ask for a few things if they're not kind of so large that you would impede the process of the spec writing and finishing itself.
Yep.
I kind of hope we would get more drama out of this.
Yeah, the members of the Lightweight DITA committee were supposed to stand up and stomp. But
Yeah, because I've been watching Dynasty from the 80s, so I was kind of hoping we'd get drama like that.
Sorry. You also mentioned the plugins registry. I was wondering if you have some statistics, like are people using it, how many plugins are installed that way?
Yeah, so unfortunately not, because we don't have any money. So we just host it in, so now the question, is it Netlify or GitHub Pages?
It's both.
It's both, yeah. So we just use the free stuff that some companies provide. If we were to add statistics to it, it would be really nice. But my original design with that was that we can't sort of spy what people install. When you install a plugin using some piece of code that you copy and copy from the registry and run it on your console or terminal, it doesn't go home and tell that I'm going to download this plugin. So the links to the plugin files are direct. There's no sort of spying in there between.
Okay, so the plugin is not stored basically
No,
on the
we don't
registry.
store
You
them.
just have the reference and then you don't know how many downloads.
Yeah, we could have sort of a URL that will just forward it to the actual file that's hosting it, and we would get the information. But at the time I decided I think we shouldn't spy on people. So now it's more difficult to walk back.
Yeah, in fact, we don't even host the files, right? So, someone who builds a plugin can host it on their own server and say, this is the URL for my plugin. What we do have is just, basic web visitor statistics on the plugins page itself. And each of the plugins pages has a plugin URL, so we can say no one has ever visited the page for plugin X. And this other plugin Y, that page gets called up a lot. We could probably, dig up those statistics because we do have that, but that's it.
But if somebody runs, to install a plugin, the command to install a plugin,
DITA install
at
something.
least it goes to you, for the entries. Then you can see how many accesses you have, on the registry itself.
No, it doesn't. No, wait. Because when you type in DITA install and then the ID, it will fetch the JSON file.
Yeah.
So
you can see, how many people were asking
For that JSON file.
maybe
No,
we
this
do
is
have some statistics there. But again, like I said, I didn't want that
Yeah, but
information.
it's not like spying that I installed something, but you just have a counter.
Yeah, but when some billionaire buys Open Toolkit and they do awful things, they will misuse that information.
That's what we've been most worried about. That's why we haven't done
Yes.
it. Here we are in service of the community. But that's actually a good idea. I think we could think about whether we could extend our current web statistics that we have to encompass the JSON file requests. That's worth looking into. It's something we haven't considered yet. Thank you for making us consider
Yes,
that.
good
Yeah,
idea.
yep.
And we could even put like a counter on the page. This page has been visited 25 times, 1995 style.
Yeah, and the animated GIF of a sort of person digging.
Yep,
or
under construction. Yep. Sorry.
4-1.
Okay, other questions, other things here that we urgently needed to share?
We have a list there, but
We did, but we're also
everything.
10 minutes over, aren't we?
When do you want 4-1?
Oh yeah, when do you want 4.1? 4.0 came out yesterday.
050.
Okay, let me phrase this differently.
Oh, yeah.
Since we publicly admitted that we forgot to include the latest version of FOP, how many of you want the latest version of FOP? Should we release 4.1 so that we can give you the latest version of FOP?
No chance of antenna house bundling?
We need to ask them.
I would just like to
Billionaire
add-
buying DITA-OT.
I heard somebody in the crowd earlier say, I don't like to install the 0.0 versions of things. So 4.0, no, but 4.1 I'll install. So if we release 4.1 next week, we should be good. They're free to upgrade.
Could you perhaps wait for the Lightweight Data Committee?
Yes, we will wait for that.
Yes.
If it doesn't take more than a year. Oh, sorry, 6 months. We have a 6-month release train,
Generally. Except for this year.
approximately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally don't like the release train, but I've been told by my colleagues here that most of our end users prefer to not live on the bleeding edge and installing their plugins from the registry. My reference would be that you have the Open Toolkit core that changes occasionally, and then you go and install your own plugins, or not your own plugins, but you install the plugins yourself, pick what you need, update as you go. But most people don't do that, apparently. I might be
I
wrong.
think we have a somewhat selective crowd here in that most of the crowd here is even on 3.x. I think in most venues, like at the Convex in Phoenix, when I asked the same question in a crowd, most of the crowd was not on 3.x. And so I think those willing to come here are closer to the bleeding edge than any other crowd we're likely to find.
And I mean, maybe we could be a little bit more aggressive about publicizing the fact that there are new versions of things. We don't usually do that, but there are many tools that you install on your computer that will say, hey, you're running this version of the software. There's a new version. It's outdated. Would you like the new one? And that's something that we could certainly do. We could say when you run the DITA plugins command, You could say you have version 1.2 of this plugin installed, version 1.3 is current, would you like to download version 1.3 of this plugin that you are using? And we haven't considered that up until now, but maybe that's something we could think about in the future, is to kind of more aggressively or politely tell people there's new stuff.
Yeah, it would be nice to be able to write DITA update or upgrade to update the plugins, and of course then there's DITA upgrade self or self update. I don't know which one.
And it would fix all your custom
Brew-
PDF plugins.
Yes, that would do.
Yeah.
It wouldn't do anything with your custom plugins, of course. It would just break them. And that's why we haven't done it, because we know that whenever we change something in PDF2, all your customizations break. Every
Not
time.
all of them. No.
All of them.
No, it's not all of them. It's a select like 10% that you're going to struggle to find.
Yep.
Yeah. On that note, should we thank George and Radu for helping to put this together?
Yes.
I think so.
I think so.
Should we pause?
Yes. I personally cannot believe. I was amazed the first time George suggested this, because this was his idea the first time, and I think we all thought, really? People would come to that? And now I think this is the 25th one, is that right?
Yeah, 25th one.
Yeah, it's been going every year, even through COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the
No, it-
30th, you all get a T-shirt.
Yeah. So it's amazing that y'all come to this. Thanks for coming, and thanks for hosting it.
Thank you.
So at least I will be around tomorrow and the day after. So
Yep.
if you have questions
Yep.
regarding Open Toolkit or something related,
Aikido?
and Aikido, of course, please come and ask, because I will like to answer you.
Yeah, I think that's true of all three of us. Certainly for myself, I may appear to be an introvert sitting off at my own table at breakfast like this morning, but I'm happy to answer questions. Please, if you have questions, I'm probably not going to see most of you again for another year. So yes, please ask.
I'm definitely an introvert, but I'm willing to talk to people
Yeah.
if there's a good reason, and I think this is a good reason.
Famous last words. I have nothing to add.
Done.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.